All right, so you're out there thinking about maybe, possibly, dipping your toes into the world of rental property investment.
Yeah, it's a big world out there.
It is, and it seems like you've got your eye on Krabi, Thailand. Not a bad choice at all.
Definitely a spot that's been popping up in a lot of people's radar, I'd say.
For sure. And lucky for us, we've got a great blog post to really dive into today. It's called What Rental Yields Can Investors Expect in Krabi?
Sounds promising, getting right to the heart of it.
Right. So that's exactly what we're going to do, unpack this whole thing and see what we can learn about the potential returns you could be looking at in Krabi's rental market.
Sounds like a plan. By the end of this, we should have a much clearer picture, I think, of what kind of opportunities are really out there, and of course, those all-important factors to really think about if Krabi rentals are something you want to seriously consider.
Okay, let's jump right in. The blog post starts off by talking about rental yield, which makes sense.
Yeah, that's the foundation, really.
It is. But for anyone who might be newer to all this, can you break down exactly what rental yield means in plain English?
Absolutely. So, at its heart, rental yield is all about how much money your property is making for you in rent each year. But then you look at that as a percentage of what the property is actually worth on the market. It's basically a way to quickly size up how profitable different real estate investments could be, so you can compare them.
So it's not just about how much rent you're getting, it's about how that stacks up against what you initially put in.
Exactly. So to figure it out, you take your total rental income for the year, divide that by what you paid for the property, and then times it by 100 to get that percentage. Pretty straightforward, but super important for anyone thinking about investing.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the blog post dives into all these different things that can really affect those yields, especially in a place like Krabi. What are some of the big ones that jump out at you?
Well, that classic saying, location, 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 never gets old for a reason.
Right, especially when we're talking about a place like Krabi that's so focused on tourism.
Exactly. If you've got a property that's right by one of those incredible beaches Krabi's known for, or near a popular attraction,
You're going to be able to charge a lot more, probably.
yeah, chances are you can command higher rents, and that naturally means a better rental yield. Then, of course, the type of property itself matters a lot.
Makes sense.
Are we talking a luxurious villa, a modern condo, a more budget-friendly apartment? Each one's going to appeal to a different kind of renter, right? And that's going to influence how much you can realistically make.
Someone looking for a beachfront getaway is probably not going to be renting a studio apartment, right?
Probably not. And then there's seasonality, which is huge in a place like Krabi that lives and breathes tourism.
Makes sense. People aren't going to be flocking there year-round, probably.
They've got a very clear high season, usually from November to April when the weather's perfect and everyone's escaping the cold. But then there's the low season, from May to October when there are fewer visitors.
So that's going to affect how often your property is actually booked and what kind of rates you can charge.
Exactly. You might be fully booked all high season, but then have more empty days during the low season. It's something to keep in mind because it means your income won't be the same throughout the year.
That's a good point. Okay, so location, type of property, and seasonality. What about things that are more within an owner's control?
Oh, there's definitely a lot you can do to boost your chances of a good return. The quality of your property management can make a huge difference. If it's done well, you can get higher occupancy rates.
Because people are finding your place easily and having a good experience when they stay there?
Exactly. Plus, good management keeps those operating costs down.
Things like regular maintenance.
Yeah, exactly. You're staying on top of repairs and making sure everything's running smoothly. That all adds up to a healthier bottom line.
Makes sense. So a good property manager can really be worth their weight in gold, it sounds like.
They really can be. And then, of course, you've got the bigger economic picture, things like overall tourism trends, how strong the Thai baht is, that all plays a role in how much people are willing to spend on accommodation.
Okay, so a lot of moving parts there. The blog post also talks about how the type of property can affect those rental yields. What's the general idea there?
This is an interesting one. You might actually see a smaller condo getting a higher percentage yield than a huge villa.
Really? I would have thought the bigger, fancier place would automatically bring in more.
It seems counterintuitive, right? But a lot of it comes down to how much you're shelling out up front. That condo probably cost a lot less to buy than the villa. So even if the villa is bringing in more rent overall, when you look at it as a percentage of your initial investment, the yield of the condo might actually be a better deal.
Interesting. So it's not always about going for the biggest, most expensive property.
Not necessarily. especially in a place like Krabi, where there's such high demand for more affordable tourist accommodation in those prime spots like Aonang.
Because people are coming and going more frequently, so those units are rarely empty.
Exactly. Even if the nightly rate's a bit lower than a luxury villa, that constant turnover can make a big difference.
Okay, that's a good point. Now, what about Krabi specifically? What's the current state of the rental market there? What did the blog post say about that?
When you look at short-term rentals, especially on those platforms like Airbnb, the average occupancy rate sits around 57%.
So that's a pretty decent chunk of the year that those properties are booked up.
Exactly. It suggests there's a pretty good level of demand. And then for the average daily rate, what they call ADR, that comes in at about 2,223 Thai baht.
That gives you a rough idea of how much you could be bringing in each night, on average, of course.
Yeah. And of course, that'll vary a lot depending on the property, the location, amenities, all that good stuff.
Right, right. Now, it's not a stagnant market, though, is it? The blog post mentioned something about positive movement in revenue.
Oh, yeah, there's definitely some good momentum. The blog post points out that year-on-year revenue has gone up by something like 6.35%.
So things are looking pretty optimistic.
Yeah, it's a really good sign, actually. Suggests the market's growing, and there's a good chance for even better returns down the line.
That's definitely good news for anyone thinking about getting in on the action. So let's zoom in on the short-term rental market specifically. It seems like a big deal in Krabi given how much tourism they get.
It definitely is.
What else did the blog post tell us about that?
Well, as we said, the average occupancy is around 57%, with an average daily rate of about 2,223 Thai baht.
Right, right.
But the blog post also mentions that a typical short-term rental in Krabi gets about 208 nights booked a year. That's over half the year.
Wow, so you're looking at a good chunk of time where your property's making money.
Definitely. And back in 2023, the average host income hit about 428,000 Thai baht. Not too shabby.
Mm.
And as of late, September 2024, they had almost 3,000 active Airbnb listings.
So there's clearly a market for it. But the blog post also mentions something about the rules and regulations for Airbnb in Thailand. I know that can be a bit tricky sometimes. What's the situation there?
Yeah, you've got to be careful with this stuff. Basically, Airbnb is popular and used a lot in Thailand, but technically it's not fully authorized because of their laws about hotel licenses.
So if you're renting out your place for short stays, you're basically operating like a hotel.
In a way, yeah. And technically that means you need a hotel license. But the thing is, how much they actually enforce those rules can be a bit hit or miss, depending on the area.
So there's a bit of a gray area there.
Kind of, yeah. You've got loads of properties listed and rented out, but it's a legal detail that anyone thinking about Krabi really needs to understand.
So do your homework and maybe get some legal advice before jumping in.
Absolutely. It's always better to be safe than sorry.
All right, good advice. So say you are in that short-term rental market. What did the blog post say about booking patterns? You know, anything that could help you keep those bookings coming in?
Well, seasonality is a big factor. Again, high season. From November to April, that's when you're going to see the most bookings.
People escaping the cold and looking for some sunshine.
Exactly. But the low season, you'll naturally see a dip. Another thing the blog post mentioned is that a lot of guests, especially those traveling during the high season, book weeks or even months in advance.
So you need to be on top of your game with your listings and marketing.
Absolutely. Make sure your calendar's up to date and everything's looking good online. And here's a little tip. The blog post suggests offering some good discounts for longer stays, especially during those shoulder seasons or the low season. It's a good way to fill those gaps and keep that income coming in.
Makes sense. Give people an incentive to stay longer when it's not peak season.
Exactly. Now let's talk about how much money you could actually make as a host. What are the big things that can really boost that income? First things first, your property and where it's located. Those are crucial.
So a villa with a pool and ocean views is going to be more attractive than a basic apartment inland.
Most likely, yeah. And being close to the action, those popular beaches and tourist spots, that's always a plus.
Because convenience is key. People want to be in the heart of things.
Exactly. And then there's how you manage the property. Are you being proactive, responding to inquiries quickly, making sure the place is spotless?
All those little details matter.
They really do. It's about creating a great experience for your guests, whether you're managing it yourself or you've got someone else doing it for you. Happy guests leave good reviews, and that can lead to more bookings and even higher rates.
It's all connected. The blog post also mentioned different ways to handle the management side of things.
Yeah, you've got a few options. You can go it alone and manage everything yourself.
Which gives you a lot of control.
It does, yeah.
Yes.
and potentially the highest profit since you're not paying anyone else, but it's a lot of work.
A lot of time and effort involved.
Exactly. Then there are those rental programs. Some developers or management companies offer these, and they can give you a more stable income because they guarantee a certain return.
So you know what you're getting, which can be comforting.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But the downside is you might not make as much overall profit compared to managing it yourself.
Makes sense. So less risk, but also potentially less reward.
Yeah, that's the trade-off.
Hmm.
And then you've got the option of hiring a third-party property management company. They'll handle all the day-to-day stuff.
So you can be more hands-off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But of course, they take a cut of your rental income.
Right. That's how they make their money.
Yep. It's all about finding the balance that works for you, how much control you want, how much effort you're willing to put in, and how much you want to rely on someone else.
Makes sense. So for someone looking for good rental yields in Krabi specifically, where should they be looking? The blog post highlighted some promising locations.
Oh yeah, give some good recommendations. For short-term rentals, Aonang's always a solid choice.
It's got that central location, all the touristy stuff, easy to get around.
Exactly. Rayleigh Beach is another popular one, but it's more secluded, more of a luxurious experience, so you're going to attract a different kind of traveler there.
People with deeper pockets, maybe.
Possibly. And then there's Klong Wong, that's known for being more peaceful, popular with families, and people looking to stay a bit longer, away from all the hustle and bustle.
So those are the big names, the established spots. What about places that are maybe a little more up and coming with potential for the future?
The blog post talks about some really interesting emerging neighborhoods. Tubcake Beach is one of them.
I've heard of that one. Isn't that known for being super fancy?
Yeah, lots of high-end resorts, really beautiful and peaceful, perfect for those travelers who want a bit of tranquility. Krabi Town is another one. It's the capital of the province, and it's got a great mix of local culture and modern amenities.
So a bit more of an authentic experience.
Exactly. And it's becoming more popular for longer-term rentals, too.
Yeah.
And then there's Nofra Thara. It's close to Aonang, but it's got a more laid-back vibe. There's a good chance for development there in the future.
So potentially some good capital appreciation in those areas, along with those rental returns.
Yeah, exactly. It's about thinking long-term, too.
So when you're looking at these different locations, what are some of the practical things you should be considering?
Well, think about how easy it is to get around. Is it close to the Krabi International Airport? That's a big plus for tourists.
Because nobody wants a long, complicated journey after they get off a flight.
Right. And of course, being close to the beaches, other attractions, that's key. But think about the everyday stuff, too. Are there restaurants nearby? Shops? What about healthcare?
Makes sense. You need to make sure it's easy for people to live there, even if it's just for a short time.
Exactly. Having all those amenities close by will make your property more appealing to all kinds of renters, which means higher occupancy and better yields for you.
Okay, so we talked about Airbnb and those hotel license rules earlier. What about the bigger picture for rentals in Krabi? Anything else to keep in mind?
It's worth repeating that if you're running your rental like a hotel with lots of short stays, you're technically supposed to have a hotel license in Thailand.
And that can be a whole process, right?
It can be, yeah. You got to get building permits, pass fire safety inspections, make sure you're following all the zoning rules, and then officially register everything with the local authorities.
Sounds like a lot of paperwork and red tape.
It can be, yeah. And it can take a while and cost some money, too. That's why the blog post recommends talking to a lawyer or a property expert who knows the Krabi market inside out. They can give you the most up-to-date advice.
So get the right help, because the rules can change and you don't want to get caught out.
That's right. And it's not just about those big hotel license rules. You've got to look into any local regulations that could affect your rental, too.
What kind of things?
Things like rules set by condo associations,
Yeah.
any local council ordinances, and zoning restrictions for the specific property. Some condo associations might not allow short-term rentals at all, for example.
So you could buy a property thinking you can rent it out on Airbnb, but it turns out you can't.
Exactly. That's why doing your due diligence is so important. You've got to understand all their little details to avoid problems down the line and make sure you can run your rental the way you planned.
Okay, so research is key on the legal side of things as well as everything else. Now, one of the big decisions for investors is whether to go for short-term or long-term rentals. What does the blog post say about how those compare in Krabi?
Well, short-term rentals can have really tempting yields, especially during those peak tourist seasons. You can charge a premium per night.
Makes sense. People are willing to pay more for a prime spot during high season.
Absolutely. But you've got to factor in the costs, too. Short-term rentals tend to have higher operating costs, things like cleaning more often, those property management fees.
Because you've got people coming and going all the time.
Exactly. And then there's the chance of having empty days, especially during the low season.
So less predictable income.
Yeah. Long-term rentals, on the other hand, they usually give you a more steady, predictable income throughout the year.
Even if you're not charging as much per night.
Right. And the blog post also mentions that some rental programs offer guaranteed returns, which can be appealing for some investors.
So you know exactly how much you're going to make no matter what.
Yeah. Take some of the guesswork out of it.
So higher potential returns with short-term rentals, but maybe a bit more risk and effort involved. With long-term rentals, it's a steadier income, but maybe not as much upside.
That's a pretty good summary. And it's important to remember that demand for each type of rental is different in Krabi.
In what way?
Well, short-term rentals are completely tied to tourism, so you're going to see those big swings in demand depending on the season. But long-term rentals, they're a bit more stable.
Because you've got expats, locals, people working in Krabi for longer periods.
Exactly. They need a place to live year-round. Understanding those different demand patterns is crucial when you're figuring out your investment strategy.
Makes sense. You want to make sure you're targeting the right market.
Yeah.
So what are some of the different strategies the blog post talks about?
Well, you could go all in on short-term rentals if your main goal is to maximize your returns, and you're okay with being more hands-on or having a management company take care of things.
So you're putting in the work or paying someone else to do it for you.
Right. But if you want a more laid-back approach with a steady income, long-term rentals could be a better fit.
Less hassle, but maybe not as much excitement in terms of potential profit.
Yeah, that's the trade-off. And then there's the hybrid approach. Some people do a mix of both short-term rentals during the high season to capitalize on those higher rates, and then switch to longer-term rentals in the off-season to keep that occupancy up.
So you're getting the best of both worlds.
Kind of, yeah. But whatever strategy you choose, always keep those local regulations in mind.
Don't forget about the legal side of things.
Exactly. All right, we can't talk about rentals in Krabi without talking about tourism.
Right, because that's what drives the whole market.
It is. The more tourists they get, the higher the demand for accommodation, which means higher occupancy rates and potentially more money for you.
Simple economics.
Yeah, pretty much. And as we've talked about, those seasonal trends in tourism are a big deal. They directly impact occupancy and rental rates throughout the year.
So you've got to be aware of those peaks and dips.
For sure. At the end of the day, tourism is what fuels the rental market in Krabi. The blog post mentions that average annual revenue for short-term rentals is around 428,000 Thai baht.
Which is pretty impressive. But what about people who don't live in Krabi, or maybe just don't want to handle all the day-to-day stuff?
Property management companies could be a real lifesaver in that case.
They take care of everything for you.
Well, almost everything. They screen tenants, they take care of repairs and maintenance, they market your property, and they make sure you're following all the rules and regulations.
Sounds pretty comprehensive.
It is. Yeah, it could be a huge help, especially if you're an overseas investor or you just don't have the time to deal with everything yourself.
So how do you go about finding a good property management company in Krabi? What did the blog post say about that?
Do your homework. Talk to other property owners, see who they recommend.
Word of mouth is always good.
Yeah, it's the best kind of advertising sometimes. Check out online reviews too, but remember to take them with a grain of salt.
Because you never know who's writing those reviews.
Exactly. Look for a company with a solid track record, especially in the Krabi market. Make sure they're licensed and insured too.
So you know they're legit and you're protected.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to shop around. Talk to a few different companies, see what they offer, how much they charge, how they communicate.
Get a feel for who you'd be comfortable working with.
Exactly. A good property management company should be proactive, transparent, and really understand the rental market in Krabi.
So they're on top of things and they know what they're doing.
Exactly. And don't forget to ask about any special rental programs they might offer.
Okay, good advice. Now, what about the costs involved?
Most property management companies charge a percentage of your rental income, somewhere between 10% and 30%.
So the more you make, the more they make.
In a way, yeah. But make sure you get a clear breakdown of what's included in that fee. Some companies might charge extra for things like finding tenants, handling big repairs, or specific marketing campaigns.
So there might be hidden costs to be aware of.
Potentially, yeah. Make sure you understand all the costs involved so you can accurately calculate your return on investment.
So you know what your profit really is.
Exactly. Now, we've got to be realistic. Every investment has some risks. What did the blog post say about the potential downsides in Krabi? One of the big ones is market volatility.
So the market can go up and down.
Yeah, exactly. Even though Krabi is seen as a pretty stable market, it can still be affected by changes in tourism, the overall economy, and investor confidence.
So factors outside your control.
Absolutely. And then there's the risk of regulatory changes.
Those hotel license rules, for example, could change.
Yeah, exactly. The laws in Thailand can change, and those changes could impact your investment.
So you've got to stay informed.
Definitely. And then there are broader economic factors. Inflation, interest rates, changes in currency exchange rates. Those can all affect your returns.
So it's not a guaranteed thing. You've got to be smart and do your research.
Absolutely. Now, what about the future? What's the outlook for rental yields in Krabi?
What did the blog post say about that?
Overall, it looks pretty good, actually. They think the market's going to keep growing thanks to more tourists, improvements in infrastructure, and more interest from international investors.
So the future's bright for Krabi.
It seems that way, yeah. They expect property values to go up and rental rates to increase, especially for those prime properties that are well managed. But of course, it's always smart to keep an eye on the global economy and what's happening in the local market.
So don't get complacent. Things can change.
Right. The blog post also mentions the different types of investment opportunities available: condos, villas, off-plan properties, even those rental guarantee programs.
So there's something for everyone, depending on your risk appetite and how much you want to be involved.
Exactly. And then there are the longer-term trends to think about.
What kind of things?
Well, there's a big push for sustainable tourism these days, so that could attract a whole new kind of traveler to Krabi.
The eco-conscious crowd.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's the rise of digital nomadism, which could lead to more demand for longer-term rentals with good internet.
People working remotely from anywhere in the world.
That's it. And any infrastructure development in the area. That's always a good sign.
Makes the place more accessible, more attractive to visitors.
Exactly. But the blog post makes a good point. These are just projections based on what we know now. Things could always change, so it's important to do your own research.
Stay informed.
Absolutely. Now, to bring all this to life, the blog post gives some examples of real people who've made successful rental investments in Krabi.
Always good to see some real-world success stories.
Right. So they mention a smaller condo near Ao Nang Beach that's consistently getting a rental yield of over 8%.
Not bad at all.
Not bad at all. And they say it's because of the great location and how well the property's managed.
Location and management, two key ingredients.
Definitely. They also talk about a villa further inland with private pool that's really popular with those higher-paying tourists.
So those extra amenities really pay off.
They can, yeah. It's all about finding the right property for the right market.
Okay, so there's definitely potential for good returns in Krabi, but it's not just luck. You've got to make smart choices.
Exactly. The blog post also includes some comments from investors. What are some of the things they learned from their experience?
I'm curious to hear that.
Well, a lot of them talked about how important it is to find a good property management company.
Makes sense. They can make or break your investment.
Absolutely. Others mentioned that they've been successful by focusing on properties with unique features or catering to a specific type of traveler.
So finding your niche?
Exactly. And a lot of them said that the rental income they're making covers all their costs and leaves them with a good profit.
So they're making money.
They are, which is the whole point, right?
Absolutely. So what were the big takeaways from all these successful investments?
It all boils down to location, good property management, targeting the right market, and effective online marketing.
Makes sense. It's a combination of factors. So bringing it all together, what are the key insights we've learned about rental yields in Krabi?
Basically, Krabi's rental market has a lot to offer investors. The average occupancy rate is pretty healthy, and there's good potential to make a solid income, especially with tourism being so strong.
But it's not without its challenges.
Of course not. The market can fluctuate, and there are risks involved. But if you choose the right location, understand the local rules, and do your research, you can definitely make it work.
So it's not a get-rich-quick scheme, but with careful planning and smart choices, it could be a really good investment.
That's a great way to put it.
All right, so Krabi sounds promising, but as always, it's about doing your due diligence. Now, for you listening out there, as you're thinking about all this, I want you to consider this. What other up-and-coming international property markets might be worth looking into for their rental potential? And what specific things would you need to research in those markets to make sure you're making a smart investment? Some food for thought as you continue your investment journey. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.